I remember that day like it was yesterday, though it feels like a lifetime ago. My name's Marcus Bennett, and for nearly 6 years I was the lead product strategist at Visionary Tech, a scrappy startup with big dreams and even bigger challenges. I wasn't just any employee, I was the guy who crafted the product vision, the roadmap, and ultimately the core platform that put us on the map. Every feature, every customer journey, every pivot, my fingerprints were all over it. Our startup world is a battlefield. You hustle, you grind, you sacrifice sleep and social life for that one big break. And for us, that break came in the form of an $18 million Series B funding round. I remember the weeks leading up to it were relentless. I worked day and night, no exaggeration. I was juggling 100 things, drafting investor decks, running product demos, coordinating with engineering to prioritize features, analyzing market trends, and negotiating terms with potential investors. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't exhausting, but every ounce of effort was worth it when the check finally cleared. The morning we closed the deal, the office was buzzing with excitement. People were shaking hands, clapping backs, and there was this infectious energy in the air that said we were finally the real deal. Even John Fairchild, our CEO, who usually kept his cards close to the chest, came up to me with a rare smile. "Marcus, you knocked it out of the park. This changes everything for Visionary Tech." Hearing that felt like validation after all the late nights, the tough calls, and the endless pressure. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get the recognition I deserved, not just as a strategist, but as a key leader in this company's future. After all, it was my vision that convinced investors to back us. It was my blueprint that engineers built on. I was the guy everyone leaned on when the stakes were high. Then came lunchtime. Rick Harrison, our COO, a man who, in his usual no-nonsense style, rarely showed emotion, called me into his office. I figured he wanted to discuss next steps for the product, or maybe plan the rollout post-funding. What I didn't expect was the cold, clinical way he slid a piece of paper across his desk toward me. "Marcus," he said flatly, not even looking up, "we're restructuring. Your role is being eliminated." I blinked. "Excuse me?" He finally met my eyes, and I saw no remorse, no hesitation, just business. "Your position no longer fits with our strategic direction." Strategic direction? I was the one who designed the strategy. The very roadmap that led us to that 18 million, my strategy, was apparently irrelevant now. I felt a strange numbness creeping in. The room seemed to shrink. My mind raced trying to understand if this was some sort of joke or cruel mistake. Was this some sort of power play? Maybe a misunderstanding? But no, it was real. "I don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just closed the biggest investment in our history. I thought my role was critical moving forward." Rick's expression didn't change. "It's not about your performance, it's about what the company needs now. We're moving in a different direction, and your role isn't part of that plan." The words hit me like a freight train. Here I was, the guy who had architected the entire product vision, the one who had been pushing the company forward for years, and now I was being told I was surplus to requirements. I wanted to protest, to shout that they couldn't fire the person who made the company what it was today. But I knew better. I'd learned in this business that sometimes, no matter how much blood, sweat, and tears you pour in, you're still just a replaceable piece on someone else's chessboard. So, I stood, nodded, and quietly began packing my desk. I didn't have much to take, just a few personal items, photos of my family, a leather-bound notebook filled with sketches, product specs, and strategic plans I'd been working on for years. That notebook was my baby. It contained every detail of the platform architecture, feature prioritization, and user experience flows. It was a map of my vision, painstakingly crafted and refined. As I boxed up my things, I noticed the curious, confused stares from colleagues. Some looked sympathetic, others stunned, and a few simply avoided eye contact. I passed by the CEO's office but didn't get so much as a glance. Walking out of Visionary Tech's headquarters that day, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and above all, a deep sense of betrayal. Why now? Why after the biggest success we'd had? Why was I being cast aside when the company was finally on solid footing? That evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I stared at the termination letter. The words "effective immediately" felt like a punch to the gut. My mind replayed every moment leading up to that day. The long nights, the sacrifices, the breakthroughs. Had it all been for nothing? But then, beneath the sting of rejection, a new feeling began to grow. Resolve. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. This wasn't just about a job. It was about the future of the company and the recognition of the work I'd done. I had to get my affairs in order, document everything carefully, and prepare to protect my intellectual contributions. After all, Visionary Tech's platform was built on my vision. That night, I opened my laptop and started organizing every email thread, every project plan, every prototype and wireframe I could find. I was building my case, because if the company wanted to rewrite history, I was going to remind them of the truth. Yes, I was out of the door, but I was far from defeated. That evening, when I finally closed the door behind me and left the office for what felt like the last time, a strange mix of emotions swirled inside me: disbelief, frustration, and a deep, simmering resolve. The office, once a place of endless energy and creative buzz, now seemed cold and empty in my memory. I kept replaying the conversation with the COO in my head, trying to understand how the man who had applauded my efforts during our funding round could so swiftly discard me without so much as a second thought. Sitting alone at my kitchen table under the soft glow of the lamp, I pulled out the thick envelope containing the severance agreement. The legal jargon was dense, a protective shield for the company, stripping me of my role and benefits but saying nothing about the legacy I'd left behind. As I read, my mind drifted back to every meeting, every long night, every brainstorming session that had gone into building the product roadmap and designing the platform's architecture. This wasn't just work to me, it was my vision made real. I opened my laptop and began methodically combing through my personal archives. Detailed flowcharts mapping out complex user journeys, annotated code snippets that formed the backbone of the platform's authentication system, and hundreds of emails exchanged with investors and internal teams, where I had outlined my plans and solutions. These documents weren't just files. They were a testament to years of innovation and problem-solving that no one else could replicate. The more I reviewed, the clearer it became. Visionary Tech wasn't just losing an employee. They were losing the architect of their future. Their decision to let me go was not only unjust, it was dangerously short-sighted. But anger alone wasn't enough. I needed a plan, a way to ensure that my contributions were recognized and protected. I began organizing my evidence into a comprehensive portfolio. I documented commit timestamps from our GitHub repositories, tracing the evolution of critical features I had coded before and during my tenure. I gathered email threads where investors praised my strategic insights. I pulled up early product presentations showcasing designs and concepts I had spearheaded. This wasn't just about proving my worth to the company. It was about establishing an undeniable record that would hold up in any dispute. The following day, I met with Ann Whitman, a lawyer with a sterling reputation for defending tech innovators in intellectual property conflicts. Sitting across from her in a quiet corner office, I laid out everything: my story, my evidence, and the severance agreement that felt more like a silencing tool than a fair settlement. Anne's sharp eyes scanned the documents, her brow furrowing in concentration. "You've got a compelling case, Marcus," she said after a long pause. "The fact that much of this work predates your employment contract gives you a solid legal foundation. Severance agreements often try to sweep pre-existing IP under the rug, but that won't hold if we can prove the work was yours from the start. The key now is to move carefully. Avoid unnecessary conflict, but don't let them sidestep their obligations." Her words struck a chord. I wasn't just fighting for a paycheck or a job anymore. I was fighting for justice and acknowledgement. Anne's strategic counsel helped me see the big picture. I would need to be patient, prepared for long negotiations or even litigation, but most importantly, I had to maintain control over my story and my rights. As days turned into weeks, I began to notice subtle signals from within Visionary Tech. Customer support tickets were spiking, and internal memos leaked hints of growing frustration on the engineering side. Without my involvement, the company's core product, built on the complex system I had designed, was faltering. Bugs that had once been quickly squashed lingered, client complaints mounted, and feature rollouts slowed to a crawl. Then came the message from the lead engineer, tentative and professional, requesting my advice on resolving a critical system failure. I read it multiple times, feeling a mix of vindication and caution. They needed me, that much was clear, but I wasn't about to rush back and hand over the reins without securing my position. I chose to hold firm, letting the company experience the consequences of its decision. It was a powerful message in itself. Undervaluing key contributors could bring everything to a halt. But while I held back direct involvement, I stayed informed through trusted contacts, quietly monitoring the company's struggles. At night, when the world outside was still and quiet, I found myself reflecting on what all this meant, not just for me, but for the countless others whose work is often overlooked or co-opted in the corporate world. I thought about the principle of ownership, the value of recognition, and the silent battles fought behind boardroom doors. This wasn't just a personal fight, it was about standing up for creators everywhere. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but I was no longer the sideline strategist. I was a guardian of my own legacy, and no amount of dismissal or disregard could take that away from me. Visionary tech may have cut me loose, but I was already preparing to turn the tables and to make sure the truth about my role could no longer be ignored. The weeks after my departure turned into a painful, drawn-out saga for Visionary Tech. Though at first, I didn't hear much directly. The company had gone silent, but through scattered conversations and industry whispers, I started piecing together a disturbing picture. The core platform, my brainchild, was crumbling. I still remember that first call from Olivia, the CTO. She sounded strained, not the confident collaborator I'd known, but someone grappling with a system that suddenly felt foreign. "Marcus," she said, hesitating, "we're in a tough spot. The team's struggling to keep the platform stable. Bugs are multiplying faster than we can patch them, and some critical modules, especially those dealing with security and authentication, are behaving unpredictably." Her words hit me hard. I had spent countless late nights architecting those very modules, building layers of complex logic and encryption to protect our users and data. They weren't just lines of code. They were a carefully balanced ecosystem designed with precision and foresight. And now, without my involvement, that ecosystem was unraveling. Over the next few days, I received more fragmented reports from former colleagues, still loyal enough to keep me in the loop. The engineers were overwhelmed. Despite their best efforts, they lacked the intimate understanding necessary to navigate the labyrinth of dependencies and custom logic I had woven into the platform. I had always documented the work thoroughly, but much of it required a certain mental framework that only I possessed. To them, it was like trying to pilot a plane using manuals written in a language they barely spoke. One junior engineer confided in me during a chance meeting at a tech meetup. He looked exhausted, rubbing his eyes as he explained, "Marcus, it's like the whole system's a puzzle missing the final pieces. Every time we fix one bug, two more pop up. We're chasing shadows here." He showed me screenshots of dashboards flooded with error logs, user complaints stacking up in the help desk system, and deployment pipelines constantly failing. As I processed this, it was clear that the company's pride and short-sighted decisions had led them into this mess. The COO, who had so confidently dismissed my value, was now forced to admit defeat behind closed doors. I knew he'd probably issued some kind of desperate directive to reach out to me, which Olivia's message confirmed. But I wasn't about to just step in and save the day for free. It was a harsh lesson for Visionary Tech, one they had brought upon themselves by undervaluing the very foundation of their product. I carefully considered my options. If I threw myself back in immediately, it would undermine my leverage and send a message that they could treat me as disposable. Instead, I chose to remain a reluctant advisor from a distance. I offered Olivia strategic advice on high-level problem solving and suggested ways to triage the most critical bugs, but I declined any hands-on coding or direct intervention without proper negotiations. I wanted to protect my intellectual property rights and ensure the company understood the value of what they had lost. Meanwhile, the company's troubles multiplied. Customer complaints surged, particularly regarding login failures and security glitches, the very authentication protocols I had designed to be the company's strongest selling point. These issues began to affect user retention and investor confidence alike. I watched, partly with sympathy, but mostly with a sense of justice, as Visionary Tech's internal chaos played out. Investor meetings became tense, with the board growing restless and demanding answers from the executive team. The COO's bravado was replaced by nervous attempts to control the narrative, but the cracks were too deep to cover. The engineering team's morale plummeted, with key staff members threatening to leave. Word even leaked that some were seeking opportunities elsewhere, unwilling to continue struggling without leadership or clarity. Through it all, I remained grounded. I knew my contributions went beyond just writing code or creating designs. I had built the very backbone of the product, shaping the company's identity and future. And now, more than ever, that realization was undeniable. At night, in the quiet of my home office, I pored over my original designs, timelines, and documentation. I reviewed every piece of code, every decision I had made, reminding myself that this was my creation, my intellectual property, and I had every right to protect it. I also consulted extensively with my attorney, mapping out a clear strategy to assert my rights and seek compensation for the value I had built. This period was a bittersweet mix of vindication and frustration. I felt validation in seeing the company's reliance on my work laid bare, but also frustration at the unnecessary suffering caused by poor leadership decisions. Visionary tech was paying the price for short-term thinking and disrespecting the true innovators. Yet, amidst the chaos, I saw opportunity. The company needed me. More importantly, the company had no choice but to recognize that their survival depended on my knowledge and contributions. The balance of power was shifting, and I was preparing to step back into the arena, but this time on my terms. This was no longer just about a job or a paycheck. It was about justice, recognition, and the future of a company built on the foundation of my work. The coming weeks would test all of us, but I was ready. It was about a month after I had stepped away from Visionary Tech when I began to realize the true scale of the betrayal. The company was struggling, sure, but what shocked me the most was the extent to which the COO, Derek Collins, was actively rewriting history, claiming as his own the very platform I had spent years developing. The core technology that had made our company attractive enough to secure that $18 million investment in the first place. It started innocuously enough. During one of my routine meetings with Valerie, my attorney, we were going over the severance agreement and discussing the potential legal grounds for my claims. Valerie, a sharp and meticulous professional with years of experience in intellectual property law, suggested I collect every shred of documentation I could find that might prove my authorship of the platform. She wanted emails, code repositories, project plans, anything with timestamps, anything that showed the timeline of my involvement. I thought I had a decent collection already, but as I dove deeper, I began to uncover troubling evidence of Derek's attempts to steal credit. I remember the exact moment I stumbled on the first email chain, dated several months before I left the company, where Derek forwarded an internal memo to investors claiming the technical vision and innovation of Visionary Tech's flagship product was entirely his doing. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, disbelief washing over me. That was just the beginning. Valerie and I spent countless late nights piecing together a mountain of proof. There were GitHub commit histories with clear timestamps showing that major components of the platform had been developed months, even years, before Derek was promoted to COO. There were emails between myself and other engineers discussing critical design decisions Derek had no part in. More damningly, I found investor presentations and press releases where my name was completely omitted, replaced instead by Derek's photo and biography as the lead innovator. The weight of it hit me hard. It wasn't just a professional slight, it was theft, plain and simple. The man who had pushed me out of the company was presenting my life's work as his own to raise capital, to build his reputation, and to consolidate his power. I felt anger, yes, but more than that, I felt a profound sense of violation. I could almost hear the echoes of our last conversation. Derek telling me, "Marcus, your role here is done. We're moving forward without you." At the time, I thought it was just ruthless corporate politics. Now, I understood it was a calculated move to erase me from the company's story. One of the hardest parts was grappling with the idea that this could go on unnoticed if I didn't act. The investors had been fed a false narrative. The board was being misled. My reputation and the very product I had built were at risk of being permanently distorted. With Valerie's guidance, we methodically assembled a dossier of evidence. We cross-checked every email, every commit, every presentation slide. We created a timeline that laid bare the truth, that every key feature, every architectural breakthrough, every major milestone of the platform was the result of my work long before Derek's involvement. I remember the countless nights I spent reviewing code with a fine-tooth comb, tracing changes back to their original author. I reread every email, every message where I had explained my designs or pushed back on proposed changes. Each piece of evidence was a reminder of the dedication and passion I had poured into this project. But I also knew this was more than just proving authorship. It was about reclaiming my legacy, protecting my intellectual property, and ensuring that visionary tech could not continue down a path built on deception. We prepared carefully, knowing this would not be a quiet fight. Derek would push back. He had the board's ear, the company's resources, and the power of narrative on his side. But the truth was on my side, and we intended to make sure it could no longer be hidden. In parallel, I kept close tabs on the company's internal turmoil. Reports of growing technical debt, frustrated engineers, and missed deadlines kept filtering in. The platform, the very thing I had built to be scalable and robust, was starting to falter without proper leadership, and without the person who knew it best. At one point, Olivia Chen, the company's lead investor, and someone I had built a rapport with during the funding rounds, reached out. She was concerned, cautious, but open to hearing my side. She had sensed cracks in the COO's story and was ready to push for transparency. The stage was being set for a dramatic reckoning. The evidence was ready. The supporters were quietly rallying. I was preparing to face the board and the entire company with a truth that could no longer be ignored. Sitting in my home office late one evening, scrolling through the emails and documents on my laptop, I felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. Years of work and sacrifice had brought me here. I wasn't just fighting for recognition, I was fighting to protect everything I had built, for the integrity of the company and for the future of visionary tech. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a battle for justice, for respect, and for the truth to finally come to light. The morning of the emergency board meeting dawned overcast and gray, fitting the heavy mood that had settled over me in the days leading up to it. I remember pulling up to Visionary Tech's sleek, modern headquarters, the glass facade reflecting a sky that seemed as uncertain as my own future. Walking through those doors felt like stepping onto a battlefield. I didn't want to fight, but knew I had to win. Olivia Chen, the lead investor who had become my unexpected ally, met me with a firm handshake and a calm but determined smile. "This is our moment," she said quietly as we headed toward the conference room. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The long, polished mahogany table was surrounded by a crowd of serious-looking board members, key investors, and senior executives. Derek Collins, the COO, who had abruptly fired me despite my pivotal role in securing the company's critical $18 million investment, sat at the head of the table. His confident posture now looked forced, his eyes darting nervously as if trying to read my every move. The room was buzzing with whispered conversations as everyone awaited the official start. Olivia opened the meeting with a clear, authoritative voice, explaining the gravity of the situation. "We're here to examine serious allegations regarding intellectual property, leadership, and the integrity of the company's core technology platform." Her words settled the room into a tense silence. When it was my turn to speak, I felt a knot in my stomach, but I forced myself to remain composed. This was not just about defending my own reputation. It was about setting the record straight for the future of the company and for everyone who had been left in the dark. I began by recounting my journey, how I had poured years of sweat and sleepless nights into the product strategy and core platform design, and how I had single-handedly led the funding round that secured the vital $18 million. I carefully explained how Derek had not only dismissed me without cause, but had also actively worked to erase my contributions from the company's narrative, presenting himself as the visionary behind our success. My voice was steady as I presented the evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the past weeks. First, I shared detailed screenshots from the company's GitHub repository, highlighting commit histories and timestamps that irrefutably proved my authorship of key components months before Derek even got involved. The data was clear and precise. There was no way to dispute it. Next, I pulled up email chains between Derek, myself, and several senior team members, where Derek had explicitly acknowledged my leadership on product development internally, but had neglected to credit me publicly. His duplicity became glaringly obvious. Finally, I displayed investor presentation slides from the critical funding round. Derek's name was front and center, but mine was nowhere to be found. Not a single mention despite my central role in the product's creation and the fundraising effort. As I laid out these facts, I could see the expressions around the room shift. Some board members exchanged uneasy glances, others furrowed their brows, clearly reassessing what they thought they knew. Derek's face hardened, his jaw clenched tightly as he tried to interrupt, dismissing my claims as sour grapes from a disgruntled ex-employee. But Olivia and Valerie, my attorney who had accompanied me, quickly reined him in. "Let's focus on the evidence," Olivia said firmly. "There's no room for distraction." Then, after a moment of silence, Joseph Reynolds, a senior engineer who had remained largely quiet until that point, spoke up. His voice was calm, but resolute as he confirmed everything I had said. He described how the engineering team had struggled to maintain and evolve the platform in my absence, frequently running into issues they couldn't solve without my specialized knowledge. He pointed out that the recent technical failures and mounting customer complaints were a direct consequence of the company's decision to undervalue and then lose my expertise. Joseph's testimony hit hard. It was clear to everyone in the room that without my involvement, the company was floundering. The room grew even quieter as board members digested this revelation. Victor Lee, one of the company's largest investors known for his sharp business acumen, removed his glasses and rubbed his temples thoughtfully. "This changes the entire calculus," he muttered, almost to himself. You could feel the gravity of the situation settling over the room like a storm cloud. The company's valuation, its future product roadmap, and its very survival now depended on the board's next steps. Derek, who had seemed untouchable just weeks earlier, was visibly shrinking under the weight of the mounting evidence. When given the floor again, Derek insisted that his role was simply supervisory, and that the platform's success was a collective effort. But his words rang hollow against the avalanche of proof that showed otherwise. His supervision, it became clear, had consisted mainly of delegating tasks and taking credit for the results. The meeting dragged on for hours, the tension palpable. I sat quietly, watching the board members weigh the facts, some nodding subtly, others whispering among themselves. The dynamics in the room had completely shifted. Where once Derek had held all the power, now he was isolated, cornered by his own deceit. Finally, Olivia rose to speak, her tone firm and resolute. "Given the overwhelming evidence and the risks to Visionary Tech's future, we must act decisively. Effective immediately, Derek Collins will be removed from his position as Chief Operating Officer. Furthermore, we will begin negotiations with Marcus Bennett regarding proper recognition, compensation, and a leadership role aligned with his contributions." There was a collective intake of breath. Derek's protests turned desperate, but the board had made their decision. As the meeting adjourned, I felt a wave of emotions. Relief, vindication, but also a heavy sense of responsibility. This was not the end of the battle, but it was a critical turning point. I was no longer just the dismissed strategist. I was now the central figure in a company-wide reckoning. Walking out of that boardroom, I understood that I had not only reclaimed my voice, but had also set a precedent for myself and for anyone else whose contributions might be overshadowed or stolen. This confrontation wasn't just about one man's fight for justice. It was about integrity, fairness, and the future of Visionary Tech. After the board removed Derek as COO, I was named Chief Product Officer. I promised a fresh start focused on transparency and teamwork. We fixed key issues, improved client trust, and regained investor confidence. A fair deal recognized my work, and Derek eventually apologized. This wasn't just about credit. It was about building a stronger, fairer company ready for the future.